I'm here the whole time, so I get to ask questions twice. So, Mr. Hartley, your testimony points out that Stanford had the ability to override some of the demands of the union, and that when it came to Jewish students in the Northeast, they did that and exempted them from voting for contributing their dues to BDS efforts. Where was Stanford in all this? They just seemed kind of craven in this whole process. Did you ever hear from the administration there?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So, in terms of my interactions with Stanford, it's largely through university lawyers. They've made the determination that it's up to the union to process these religious accommodations. What happened at MIT and Cornell, and what made that a bit different was those student unions also are part of the United Electrical Workers. You know, the Jewish students there were seeking religious accommodations, and the union had decided to classify BDS anti-Israel concerns or objections.
As political. You mentioned that in your testimony.
Political, not religious, exactly.
Yeah, but why wouldn't Stanford step up and make the same sort of kind of stand?
So my understanding is that the United Electrical Workers is now processing such requests, and I think this kind of in part came after EEOC charges were filed in the Cornell and MIT cases.
So it took federal action in order to stimulate the university to do the right thing. That would be my interpretation.
In the MIT and Cornell case, where the university stepped in, correct. I'm not aware of such cases at Stanford so far. I think they have been. The union's been processing these. Again, it took 2 months for them to process this, and these things are being processed by the national union, not the local affiliates.
Now, it seems as if they still picked the charity to which you could give. If you had decided to give to Mr. Vernuccio's alma mater, Ave Maria, would that have been an acceptable, repository for your donation? I'm thinking not. I just go back to people should consider what happens when the shoe is on the other foot. So thank you for that. Mr. Beck, frivolous, unfair law practices have been filed to delay an election or to deter a party from further pursuing an election. I'm told 50% of these are dismissed. Would reforms to the unfair labor practice process, like requiring proof of allegations, address this? Because it seems to be a lot of the problem.
I think that's correct, Chairman Cassidy. There would be different ways to do it, but a couple of weeks ago you had some witnesses, particularly former General Counsel Abruzzo, who talked about backlogs at the NLRB. I think there's a variety of reasons for backlogs at the NLRB, but there's no doubt that the majority of unfair labor practice charges are not found to be meritorious year after year after year.
So what could MLRB do to deter the filing of these frivolous lawsuits?
I think that putting some guidelines or some requirements for some sort of minimal amount of a proffer of evidence or an offer of proof. I used to do civil litigation, and when you file cases in federal court, you have Rule 11 that says if you sign the complaint, you have to have a basis in fact and law. And there are other rules that prevent the filing of frivolous claims or frivolous lawsuits. But before the NLRB, what Congress has done is it's created an agency where a labor union can say, hey, this employer has acted badly, now you go investigate it, and you go impose costs on the employers to make them respond. So the union just gets sort of handed off, and everybody else bears the burden and the expense. So what we could do is—
Would that invite retribution by the employer if the employee did that and put her name or his name? Ms. Turner has spoken about people complaining about bad working conditions. I assume they'd have to sign that. Would that become available to the employer to maybe potentially target?
Well, it could be. I think there are different ways to skin this cat, but one thing you might do is provide the offer proof to the NLRB, and maybe in the first instance, at least, it's not made available to the employer. But if an unfair labor practice charge is pursued, the employer will eventually find out through the trial process, the litigation process, who all the witnesses are and who the complaining parties were. But maybe up front, maybe we pull that up front so that the NLRB has some basis to determine, wow, is there really a there there? Is there really any substantiation?
Mr. Vernuccio, just to finish up, current law requires employers to disclose workers' private information, home addresses, personal phone numbers to unions during representation campaigns, and workers cannot opt out. I'd be a little nervous about that, my personal information being given away. Is this needed to effectively reach employees in the bargaining unit?
Absolutely not. Going back to my testimony of these laws were written in the 1930s. It is clearly, even the transparency laws were from the 50s and 60s when we're dealing with labor law. It is pre-social media, pre the internet. There are multiple other ways that unions can modernize and reach out to employees. They do not need to be given home addresses, cell phones, personal emails. Legislation like the Workers' Choice Act puts workers in the driver's seat saying you can have one piece of information that they choose, but they are not mandated by the National Labor Relations, or employers are not mandated by the National Labor Relations Board to give all of this personal information. Of course, if workers want the union to have all that personal information, they are free to provide it on their own prerogative.
Okay. I ask for unanimous consent to enter a letter into the record from the National Federation of Independent Businesses pertaining to the issues discussed at this committee's labor reform bill, and all the members currently here say aye. Aye. At the end of the hearing, for any senator wishing to ask additional questions, questions for the records are due 5 p.m. Wednesday, November the 5th. Thank you again for the witnesses for being here. The committee stands adjourned.